Hello, everyone. Welcome to this conversation on broadening access to the CA profession. My name is Mike McInerney, and I'm going to be the host and moderator of our conversation today. And I'm going to kind of take a bit of time to just introduce myself and the panelists on the call today, and then we'll dive into what I think is quite a fascinating topic, and hopefully something that you guys are going to get a lot of value out of. So to give you a bit of background on myself, as I said, my name is Mike McInerney. I'm the Senior Student Engagement Officer on the CA Connect Milpark program. So I'm kind of heavily involved in the training of future CAs through both the bridging program and the PGDA program. And my background in psychology and education makes me think that often my competitive advantage is that I am a non-CA in a CA world. So hopefully that means I'm going to be asking some of the questions that those of you who aren't CAs on this conversation today will be thinking. I'm going to kind of just go around our group of panelists and introduce them to you guys before we kind of like dive into today's discussion. And I'm going to start with my colleague, Leon. I'm not quite sure whether to introduce Leon as a CA, entrepreneur, or educator. I guess all of those things have come through in his role at CA Connect, which he co-founded back in 2010. And now Leon is on the CA Connect CICA accredited online PGDA, is the head of corporate governance and auditing. And given the focus of today's discussion, I hope, Leon, that you'll forgive me for glossing over your other entrepreneurial and leadership accomplishments. With kind of like brevity in mind here as we go around the group, I'm going to jump over to Ian. And Ian is, when I read his bio, it says Ian was an accountant from birth, which I guess gives you a strong idea of how central the profession is to Ian's life. Off the back of a wealth of experience locally and globally, Ian established a local practice in the early 90s, which was rebranded as RAIN in 2004. And now has staff of close to 100 in offices around South Africa. And perhaps most relevant today, given that we'll be talking a lot about it, together, Ian and Leon kind of conceived of this idea of the numbers program, which I think is something that we're going to be talking a lot about with the goal of broadening access to the CA profession. Thanks for joining us today, Leon. Kind of quickly moving over to Hazel then. Hazel is Hazel Bafu, a CA at BDO, with over 10 years of experience. She has spent much of her career pursuing her calling in the nurturing and development of a firm's most valuable resource, its people. Hazel is now an associate director at BDO, where she works closely with trainees, from identifying talent that fits the firm culture to nurturing and developing them through their traineeship, with the sole aim of producing high potential CAs who will make great leaders for the future. So thanks for joining the conversation today, Hazel. I'm sure you're going to bring a wonderful perspective to this discussion. And finally, but obviously not least, another of my colleagues, Vyako Khoza. Vyako is one of the people I've been fortunate enough to work closely with on the CA Connect Milpark programs. And because we're so close, you might hear me refer to her by her second name, Aki. So Aki is an academic trainee working on our PGDA and bridging programs with a focus on financial reporting. Like many of the CA Connect team, Aki combines passions for education and entrepreneurship, and while pursuing her articles and postgraduate studies, has still found time to co-found Changing Lives Shoe Laundry, a social enterprise that harnesses the sneaker trend beloved by students and young professionals while creating work for young people. So thanks for joining us, Aki. Cool, that rounds out our interesting list of panelists today. And I'm going to kind of dive into the conversation because I think everyone's kind of keen to get into the meat of this topic, which I think is a relevant one given the kinds of change that we're seeing globally and across the industry. And so to kind of like get the ball rolling, I'm going to start with kind of a broad question for the panel as a whole. And what I'm really interested to hear from you guys, given your kind of different landscape of the CA profession, like what are your biggest concerns? You know, you're familiar obviously with the changes that are happening globally, and there's lots of talk of the fourth industrial revolution. and kind of questions around the profession and its relevance. So are there concerns that you have about the future, about the profession as a whole? Like, where are you guys thinking this is heading? And to kind of kick us off with, Ian, given your kind of experience in the profession, I'm actually going to ask you to kind of like kick us off, if that's okay. I seem to have lost your video, but I hope that you're still with us. Ian, can I push this question in your direction? Okay. I may have put Ian on the spot inappropriately. So let's see if one of our other panelists can jump on this. Leon, you obviously have like a close kind of finger on the pulse, I guess, in terms of the direction of the profession, having to train up, future CAs. Do you have a sense of like what the biggest challenges are that are facing the CA profession at the moment?
Question, Mike, and I think a good one, and one I think firstly, just Ian panicked there, so obviously cut off from the call. But Ian, as long as you don't copy my answer, I think firstly it's a question. It's not unique to just the CA profession. I mean, I think every profession around the world, and not just professions, economies, countries, all facing this question as to there is going to be change. We're already kind of experiencing the change. What is it going to look like in the next 5, 10, 50 years? And I think one of the things is the rate of the change, not just that there is change. I mean, there has always been change. It just seems to be happening exceptionally quickly. And with that comes, you can see it as challenges or concerns. I think I like to always frame it through the lens of where there is a challenge or a concern, there's an opportunity to change and improve things. And I think as a profession, the one thing, the various stakeholders in the CA profession, psych are one, the students are one, the academic providers are one, the firms are one. All of us as a group are aware of the need to change and adapt to that change. Exactly how that plays out is the interesting thing. And from an academic context, I suppose one of the things, and it's kind of the obvious answer, is we got to make sure people do remain relevant. And how do you remain relevant? Well, we make sure we upskilling people with the most relevant and appropriate skills to, for me, a big thing is CAs can continue to add value. If we can continue to add value, then we're going to be relevant and we're going to be a profession that's appealing. And remaining an appealing profession is important, because if you're an appealing profession, you start attracting the right type of students into the profession as a career choice when they're faced with that decision. So yeah, that's some of my thoughts.
So Leon, maybe just to kind of like challenge you a bit here, because I think for those of you who are entrenched in the CA industry and the profession, you're very familiar with the kinds of questions that are being asked about its relevance, and but I think for the benefit of an audience that's maybe a bit wider than that, can you be explicit about like what is challenging where the CAs bring value? Like, what are the things that make that like something that CAs have to consider?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things you can look at there, but one of the answers is, as things do become more automated, as we start looking into the future of the fourth industrial revolution, of which again we're already kind of a part of it, we got to reassess where we can add value and where machine learning could replace some of the value we added in the past. Sure, we want to make sure we can add value in other ways, but that's not the only way we can add value. I think we can add value in the way we have an awareness of the change. We can preempt change. We can see opportunities to adapt to that change. And that's, for me, comes through not just what we teach students, but how we teach them. And that informs their view of the world. And for me, a CA is someone who can preempt change, be comfortable with the change when it comes, and maybe even be a part of creating that change. Like, I think the worst thing as a profession is to wait for the change to happen and then just adapt. Rather be proactive and start informing that change and create what the profession should look like. And if you're a service provider in the industry, or a CA as an individual, start offering new unique services, start new unique businesses that are relevant in the context of that change.
So like, Ian, if you're okay with me turning towards you, because I think given your experience and your kind of like interaction with the profession over the last number of decades, like you would have been able to see how that's been impacting, work on the ground. Like when we talk about digitalization and 4IR and automation, like, are you seeing that having an impact on the way that you do business? And do you see it jeopardizing the role of a CA?
No, quite the opposite. I think that if you wanted an analogy, it's like when the combustion engine came in. People still had to get from A to B. It didn't mean that transport died. They forgot about the horse and carriage, and it was now you did things faster, better, more efficient, whatever. And that's what's happening to us now. If you, as you say, if I look at my career, for the first 20 years, nothing changed. You did what you did last year. That was it. You looked at last year's file and you were safe. Today, the change in the last 5 years has been greater than the 25 years before that. And the change in the next 2 years is going to be greater than the 30 years before that. And that's the pace of change. It's here, and it's one of the things that we know is going to be constant. That's it. We've got to deal with it.
And so I think you're touching on something which I think is important. Given the rate of change, is the industry equipped to keep up? Because you think about ways of doing things. Like, given that there's such a fast pace of change, is the industry able to adapt quickly enough to respond to that change? In 2 years' time, what's stopping us from being outdated?
I think it's not right to paint with the broad brush. It's like, I think different firms, different countries, different individuals will be ready for change. It's like, we know what happened to Kodak, we know what happened to Nokia. It didn't mean that all the cell phone manufacturers died. Those that adapted saw exponential growth. Those that didn't change died. It's exactly the same for us.
So maybe kind of like switching tack a little bit. Hazel, you've heard what Leon and Ian have to say about the challenges that the changing world are kind of creating for the profession. From your perspective, working with trainees, developing CAs, helping to kind of like grow the future of CAs at work, what are some of the challenges that you see coming through in the day-to-day? Like, how do you see yourself needing to equip students or trainees differently?
Thank you, Mike. So I think looking at the times that we find ourselves in and preparing for, the changes that are happening in the world, first of all, I think if we look historically at the qualification and, probably the degree that somebody did last year to become a CA, and I did maybe just over 10 years ago, and possibly Ian did, is exactly the same degree. So it's starting from the need to change the program that people are studying. Possibly a CA needs to be doing a whole lot more advanced coding for them to be able to be equipped, when they get into the environment, when everything is very automated. The amount of information that we need to be processing in order to audit is highly complex, and the volumes are crazy. So I think it's such an important thing that we need to adapt technologically. The trainees need to be quick with their fingers, typing on their computers and stuff like that is something that's become very important. And even the way we do the work in our audit. So speaking of something that, was an experience we had at BDO earlier this year, where we audit almost like a farm, where they have a lot of wild animals that are there. And, historically, we would send through a team of 10, 15 trainees, and then they have to be there for 2 days trying to figure out a way to count every one of the animals, and make sure it doesn't go back, which is difficult because you can't tell an animal to stay where it's supposed to be. And this year, for the first time, we actually performed a stock count using a drone, which is embracing technology, which is in this world where we are. And we need to be doing that because, you can't spend time counting the animals passing one by one when you can have a drone there. And then our job is now to interpret the information that comes out of the use of technology.
Yeah, thanks, Hazel. I think those are kind of like two nice points that you raised. I'm going to touch on the first one, which was around the qualification, because I think we've got two people on the panel that are maybe well positioned to speak to that. So, Leon, I'm going to come to you in a second, but Viak or Aki, I want to pull you in at this point, given that you've recently completed the qualification. You've just done your CTA. You're now an academic trainee. Do you feel like the qualification has let you down? Do you feel like the knowledge you gained is irrelevant? Like, is it that harsh, or do you feel well equipped to become a CA?
Thank you so much, Mike. I echo what Hazel was just saying right now, that we need to be able to adapt to change. I think for my journey, it's been a bit different because I was able to develop other skills through my university studies, although I went to a traditional university. But to some extent, coming into CA Connect and having to do everything online and being digital and having to teach and communicate everything online, I think that kind of lagged because all of our assessments, all of our everything that we have to do, it's written, hand and paper, and you're submitting all that. And that advancement and skill to communicate effectively, quickly, and be adaptive to the computer, it took me some time. So to some extent, I feel there is so much room for improvement in the way that the program is designed and how the education is delivered, because the world is changing indeed. And if we have to be teaching, if we have to be working, if we have to be communicating online, why are we not trained to do that at an undergraduate level or postgraduate level, so we are able to cope easily and focus on the core competencies when we arrive at work than trying to get those soft skills up to skill when we start working.
Yeah, thanks, Aki. I think that's kind of like some useful insight from someone who's recently kind of gone through that experience. And I think you're raising some important concerns. Leon, you're involved in the delivery of the qualification at the moment, the postgraduate qualification specifically. How much are we able to equip students for this world of change, of needing like good quality information system skills, IT skills? Is that something that the qualification can adapt to provide? Should they be adapting that to provide that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Mike. And I think the way I view that is that learning is a mixture of things. And when we think about what skills we are developing in the future CAs, I split it into what you're learning, which you can simplify as, okay, we've got these learning outcomes and we want to make sure they have an understanding and a competency in certain areas, which is important. And some of those learning outcomes do need to change, and we need to add new ones and we need to take others away. And some of those could include things that are more suited towards working in a sort of fourth industrial revolution world. But it's also important to understand which ones will remain the same. And then it's also informed by, well, staying on that, if I have to understand how to audit a company, whether I'm using advanced AI technology to audit the company, or I'm auditing 30, 40 years ago, the actual basic principles of understanding what an auditor does and why they do it and in what way they should, in what way they should do it might change, but how they view auditing and the principles of auditing remain the same. And there is a risk if we shift too far much towards, okay, now it's only, let's talk about, AI and deeper understanding of data analytics. If you don't understand the basics of auditing that guys were learning 30 years ago, you're also going to find yourself out of depth. And sure, the tools we can now audit with have changed, but the principles of auditing remain the same. And that's the interesting one. You've got to have a bit of both, an awareness of how the tools have changed, but how the principles remain the same. And we can say that across most of the subjects. And let's, the interesting thing there will be whether we programming an algorithm to do the audits completely automatically, the person programming that algorithm or the team programming it has got to have a deep understanding of, well, what is an auditor do, and the process and the logic that the algorithm should follow is informed by someone who needs those skills. And then second to that, I think, is how you learn. And that's a really interesting one, because we can all meet learning outcomes, but all followed in very different ways. And the how you learn is more important for me. And that's where we've got to interrogate as academic institutions, how are we getting students to learn? And if I have to maybe oversimplify it, there's learning to pass an assessment, and there's learning to have a deep understanding of a topic and a set of information. And my concern is it's shifted too much towards students just trying to pass assessments, and you can appreciate that. And I was the same as a student, because ultimately you want to pass, you want to get a job, you want to start earning a salary. But we've got to shift, even if it's just an awareness of the fact that if you are passing assessments without understanding, we're going to have an issue later on down the line. And that's what we've got to be careful of. And so how are we teaching students is important. And there are lots of things that can go into that we can interrogate how to improve things in terms of that academic experience. Because my concern is that hasn't really changed in 15 to 20 years, the how you learning.
Because I guess, you made the point sort of at the start there around the fact that like the principles remain the same. So even if the tools are changing, Hazel's example of the drone I thought was like interesting, right? The tools are going to change, but the auditors still need to understand like what the purpose of the audit is and what they're trying to achieve. Like those fundamentals are not shifting, even if the technology is. But okay, so moving on then, kind of you've started to allude to this, Leon, like how we teach. Like even if those fundamentals remain static, how we engage students with that, how we teach, how we get students to both pass those all important assessments and board exams, but also kind of like come through the other side, not just having kind of like tick the assessment boxes, but also be able to add value. What kind of opportunities lie both in the training of students, but also in the profession more broadly? And Ian, maybe you're a good person to kind of like come into this, because I think your firm and your work on the numbers program kind of speaks to this idea that, yes, there's change. Yes, there are challenges for the profession. Yes, we're questioning like our identity, but those questions are, in my sense from kind of like engaging with you guys on this, is that those questions are opportunities for us to improve and get better. So where do you see those opportunities lying? Like what are the steps forward that we can take, both in the short and medium term?
Thanks. I think that this is what really got the conversation going initially with Leon, because, my biggest challenge, and I suppose Hazel sees it from the other side as well, is that you have people that are joining that are really not CAs. They're looking for a job. So the articles and the training is just, I have to finish so many hours. They can literally tell you how many hours they have to do, and they can come to you in 2 years' time and say, I have 200 hours left. That's the wrong attitude to start off with. So, the profession needs to attract people who really want to be the best CAs, not people who are just looking for a piece of paper that says I should be earning so much. And I think that that's the challenge, is that because we haven't got the education right, we haven't got the training right, we've got the wrong ingredients. We know what we want out, but the ingredients are wrong.
So Ian, like, what is a CA? What's your sales pitch, to a student who's like considering, who's like heard of a CA? the associations, like my experience coming into to work with CAs, like CAs are accountants. Why would someone want to become a CA?
If you look back and you take the great companies that have been established in South Africa, and you look at the number of companies that have been established by CAs, Southern Sons, Liberty Life, you can go on, Bidvest, you can go on. Those are all CAs. Those are people that trained, went on to establish amazing companies. I mean, this is not about completing 1,600 hours or whatever it is that you need to do. It's just so short-sighted. It's just like, okay, you know what? The world's your oyster. This is what, look at this, the success stories, and you can go on listing these things. And if you look today, if you look at the CAs and you look at the students coming in, they aren't dreaming big. They just want to complete articles.
Hazel, I mean, you're right at the front of that, right? You're working with trainee accountants who are doing their articles, but you're also passionate about developing CAs of the future. When you imagine those CAs, what do you imagine? Who are the people that you're trying to develop here?
Thanks, Mike. So I think for me, what I would say is when I look at the CA qualification and the profession, it's, and thinking about commerce and business where there's other qualifications, or somebody else can be an accountant, but not a CA, which, maybe to somebody on the street is like, okay, but what's the difference? What's the difference between just being an accountant and being a CA? So for me, when I look at the CA qualification, it is like a diverse qualification, which encompasses a whole lot of factors in the business or commercial world, where one person gets to understand and comprehend a number of elements about business. And this makes it easy for a person who's a CA to go in and plug in to any kind of an organization. So if you think about any kind of a business, there is a finance function in every kind of a business. And that links into a whole lot of aspects, operational and leadership, where you find so many CAs end up becoming CEOs even because they understand not only the financial aspect, but also, the running of the business and having that high level of business acumen where they're able to make decisions at the right level. So if I look at the ideal CA, what is it that makes you a successful CA? So definitely what you go through in terms of studying and the training you go through as a CA trainee prepares you to be that person who has got a high level of technical competence. One that probably is difficult to compare to any other business or commercial kind of a qualification. And the second thing that gets drilled into CAs is the importance of professionalism and, valuing ethics over earnings. Because sometimes if you don't get molded in that environment where, there's a code of conduct, there's this professionalism. And I mean, we are dealing with money after all. In most roles of a CA, you have to deal with money, and ethics is much more important than, making a profit in the business and earning. And we just are in that position where it's the most important thing for us is to do the right thing always. So wherever you land, that's the most important thing. And again, one last thing about the CA profession is that it builds that curiosity to learn and, that level of adaptability that you could go out there, like Ian said, that the world becomes your oyster. As a CA, the way you get trained, you could literally go into any industry of business and potentially be able to thrive because you have that, background that is made you adaptable and compatible with pretty much any kind of business out there.
Yeah. It's almost like you're describing like the creme de la creme of the business world, right? The training and experience like gives you the fundamentals and the range and the adaptability to both plug in anywhere, but also lead anywhere. Like that's kind of the impression I'm getting from both you and Hazel. I mean, Ian. So then, Leon, let's talk specifically about the numbers program, because you guys, you and Ian.
Mike, can I add one other point on that conversation before we go to the next one?
Perfect.
And I just wanted to play a counter a bit to Ian, and I think I'm kind of on Hazel here, where I'm still very confident in the profession. I'm a bit biased, obviously, because I'm on a program that trains CAs, but I'm very confident that the CA as a brand is a strong brand. It remains strong. We have a competitive advantage to a lot of other qualifications in the commerce space, and I still think that remains true. But we've just got to be cautious of constantly, and there are challenges there. As I said, not unique to every other industry. As Ian spoke to, there are definitely challenges there. We've got to, as stakeholders in the industry, got to make sure, even if things have worked in the past, it doesn't mean they'll continue to work in the future. And let's start where we need to make some change, start thinking about doing things a bit differently. And that involves trying out new things, experimenting new things. And that being said, there are people doing that. I think I'd like to see more of it, and I'd like to see it happening faster. And I like to see, as the numbers as one example, an example of viewing things, the potential to do something a bit differently, and actually going to market with that potential solution and trying it out, seeing how it goes, reiterating. And I think the more we can do that, the more we can be sure that the CA brand keeps its competitive advantage and remains appealing and relevant, as we've touched on already.
So Leon, kind of tell me a little bit about numbers specifically, because I think this discussion is set up within the framework of numbers, right? A lot of the people that are listening to this conversation are attracted to this because they want to know, how does the numbers program, both solve the problems of the industry, but also kind of attract them. So what is it? Do you have a summary of what the program is?
Yeah, I would. Let me touch on first from my side why it came about, and then we can maybe talk to a bit what it is. Talking from a CA Connect perspective here in Milpark, one of our initial strategies and mission when we started the business 10 years ago was broadening access to the profession. And we can do that in a number of different ways, and we think we are doing that. Obviously, the one was, starting the first online CTA and bridging program in the country, but there are a number of other factors. And one of those, in my view, is an appreciation for the fact that there are a lot of high caliber quality students in the system that, for a number of various reasons, they are not in a position to study full-time and set aside 5 years of their life studying full-time at a university. Or things happen in their life and they get kind of caught somewhere, and then they're in a position where they suddenly now have to study part-time, work part-time. And so really just applying my mind to, well, let's look at how the articles are done. And, for me, one of the advantages of the CA is part of your process is getting this practical experience. I mean, I think that's huge combined with the academic, and there are a lot of professions that don't require that, but the CA requires it. The problem with that it's either kind of you do your articles on a 40-hour-a-week basis and you've either qualified, good for you, or you haven't qualified, and well, you're going to have to study part-time. And applying our minds to, well, what happens if we started to structure what articles could look like slightly differently? And in doing that, allow more people into the system. And that could be a person who didn't get into a traditional full-time articles job, or someone who didn't even consider it in the first place. And that's where we came up with numbers, where we have a lot of high caliber commerce students get to the end of their degree, and let's give them an option now to maybe pivot into becoming a CA. And that's great because we're getting a new mix of students into the pool of potential CAs. And I think from the firm side, which maybe Ian can talk to, and Hazel, they also opening up their scope of actually who they can bring in as an article clerk to work for their firm, get some work experience while studying. I'll just disclaimer that though, that the numbers program itself isn't considered part of articles, but it's a step in that direction around having work experience while studying. And what's unique about it is that Ian and his firm at Rain, we've said, well, let's have periods where the students are studying full time, because the CA, qualification requires a lot of studying. Let's have periods where they're working full time, and let's have periods where they're doing a bit of both, and mix that all into a unique 2-year program that gives them the ability to qualify as a CA, to get work experience, and to get a mix of full-time work, full-time study. And that's very different to anything that at least I've seen in the past. Yeah, I don't know.
Because I think, you know, what you're alluding to there, like I think, Leon, is it's an interesting thing about the profession, right? In order to maintain standards and sort of the status of the profession, you have to make it difficult to get into, difficult to pass. Like that's this kind of like interesting tension, right? And when you're trying to broaden access, you're trying to make it easier. So you're trying to work against that kind of like criteria that helps ensure that you get the creme de la creme, you maintain the status of the CA profession. So you're trying to kind of find ways to reduce barriers to entry into this, which I think, you know, given some of the comments that are coming through in questions, like there are a lot of students who are asking, you know, how do I get into this? I've, you know, done this program or done this course, or I'm working here. Like it seems like there's a need, at least, you know, amongst the participants on this call, for more avenues in. And I guess that's what you're saying, like Numbers is helping to address. Ian, from your side, why is Numbers the solution for RAIN? Like, what is it about Numbers that's kind of, for you, is worth investing in and kind of like making these quite big changes to the way CAs are trained?
I mean, I want to start by saying, if you're going to do the same thing, you're going to get the same result. So we weren't happy with the results we were getting. So we had to do something different. And it really was a collaboration with Milpark CA Connect of what is it that we could and need to do differently. They, you know, they put the challenges they're experiencing, and I tabled our challenges, and that's how we got to this combination of work and study. It gives a student an opportunity to see whether they're cut out for this profession, if it's just a job or if it's really a passion. You know, it must be terrible to get up every morning and go to a place you don't want to be, you know, and it's just because you don't have an alternative. And as you said, you know, if the only value of the CA qualification is that it's difficult to qualify, it's really, you know, it's really aiming low.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're fortunate enough to have parents that can keep you in university long enough, you will eventually qualify. That's all we're saying. And what we are doing is really looking elsewhere for quality students. And, you know, what this exercise has shown us is that there's really quality out there, and people that didn't consider the CA route, that are suddenly thinking, oh my word, you mean to say it is an option? And I can tell you, as we've discussed so often, is that the gene pool that we're going to be creating is just going to, you know, lift standards unbelievably. I mean, I think it's something that should have been done a while ago. And, you know, we are fortunate enough that we came across Leon and his team, and they were open enough to explore something as radical as this year. And I, you know what, I don't want to say I can predict, but there's a good chance that this will be the norm.
Well, I guess maybe Hazel, as someone who's kind of like outside of the development of this program, this is a good opportunity to kind of turn to you. You know, you've heard from Ian and Leon about the program, but your perspective coming from BDO, like, do you think this is a move in the right direction? What kind of change do you recognize this as more broadly part of?
Thanks, Mike. So I think the first time, you know, we engaged with Leon and Ian, and they were sharing this idea with us, I looked at it and saw somebody building a bridge on the practical side. You know, there is, if you think about the academics, there is, you know, the bridge that's been built in terms of, if you have done maybe a non-CA degree, you can do a bridging post-grad in order to make it into the qualification or into actually being able to follow the CA path. And looking at, the initiative that they've started on, it's literally a practical bridge being built to bring somebody from some other commerce qualification, give them the exposure, put them in the environment, get them to taste what it is. And if they actually just have the passion and the drive and, they are prepared to roll up the sleeves and do it, it doesn't matter where they started off from. It's actually not going to matter, because then they will be geared to do this and make it and eventually become a CA, because they've been given the platform that, opens access to this opportunity, which previously wasn't there. So it's something that sounds really great. And definitely, in line with where the future is going, how the world is changing, and how we need to embrace diversity and include other qualifications that are coming from other places, because anything can be converted into a CA. It probably will take a little bit of time, but if you're focused and you're driven to get it, you will get it.
Cool, Hazel. Yeah, I think that's encouraging to hear. It sounds like there's really an advantage for students who maybe have been excluded in the past to kind of like have opportunities like this. And I guess it's probably, a sign of a change that's going to happen more broadly across the industry, as people kind of recognize the value that having that diversity brings. Aki, I'm going to shift to you, because I think you have an interesting perspective, kind of like being a recent graduate. You're still walking your CA journey in many regards. Like, what is it about this kind of change, broadening? Like, let me start by asking you this, Aki. When did you know you were going to be a CA?
That's an interesting question. I think I knew I wanted to be a CA when I completed my grade 9, because I got so fascinated about the background of a business, but they wouldn't tell me at home what actually is the financial aspect, or what is the financial effect of the businesses that are there. So I felt I didn't have that much insight, so I wanted to discover that. So that was exciting for me, and I embarked on the journey.
Yeah, that curiosity of a CA really coming through there. I don't like, look, is it fair to say that you're an outlier in that regard? Because like, to know at grade 9, what it is that you're going to do, that seems like I was never that clear on my professional direction that early on. Like, do you feel like you're quite a common CA, and that you knew early on, and a lot of your peers kind of like had the same realization, always knew that was the path they were heading down?
I think I'm a bit like Ian from Beth, but well, mine was in grade 9. It's a different experience and a different opportunity, because I was born in such an environment that allowed me to have that curiosity. But for other students, it might not be the same because of the different factors that affect us. I would say for some people, it's really different. They discover when they get to university, they study something else, and they discover that this might not have as much opportunities as being a CA. So I'd rather go the CA route for that exposure, for that experience, and for that growth. But I'm not an outlier. Ian is not an outlier. There could be a number of us, but it's also the interest and the curiosity in a person of what actually excites you, what gives you that drive to wake up in the morning and say, I want to look at this, I want to focus on this, I'm excited about this.
And maybe, I don't know if it's something that you can answer yet. There was one of the questions kind of like coming up was around whether it's worth it, this journey. Because, becoming a CA, we've already acknowledged, is a difficult one. And Hazel's kind of alluded to the fact that when you're converting or coming from kind of like a different BCom or a different specialization, you may find yourself having to go through a number of additional hurdles, whether it's a bridging program or something like that. Is it worth it? Is the end result worth it? Aki, from your perspective, do you feel like it's worth it? I mean, perhaps like Leon, you're biased in this regard, but what's your take on that?
I would echo Hazel on the fact that the qualification itself is very diverse and rich. in the exposure that you get to multiple industries, to different courses that we do that require us to think critically, to engage with the world, to engage with the different industries and different businesses as well. So I think if you are very interested in the businesses and the business world, as well as helping people understand better their finances, this is the qualification to go for, because you get this diverse exposure and you get these diverse skills as you go through the program.
So maybe like one of the things that is worth kind of touching on, given your entrepreneurial bent, like a lot of the time being a CA and you know, the articles work, it's like auditing focus, right? That's my sense from as an outsider. Like there's a lot of emphasis on audit. Why, you know, why does it becoming a CA set you up well to be an entrepreneur? And Leon, maybe this is a question I can kind of come to you on as well, given your focus there. But Aki, you know, you started this business. Do you feel becoming a CA has kind of equipped you for that well?
I think for me, it was the innate interest of curiosity and wanting to help people, but the qualification as well really contributes to that interest in the business, the management, and solving problems in essence. So I think it is very, very important to have this program, especially if you're considering being in a managerial position in a business, because you get to learn so much about the business and you get to have these multiple diverse skills that equip you to either start your own business and run it ethically and run it in the way that is financially up to standard based on the principles that you learn, as well as to have that impact in the society. So I think the qualification does contribute to that success.
Yeah, impact in society. I mean, I think there's a lot of a sense that in South Africa, entrepreneurs have a massive impact because there are so many areas in our society where we need new and different solutions. And I think that's what entrepreneurs can bring. And it sounds like, you know, the kind of training and fundamentals that get drilled into you as a CA really equip you well in that regard. Leon, is that like, you know, you've spoken about being passionate about kind of like helping CAs see the options that kind of entrepreneurship bring. What's your angle on that and why a CA is a kind of path in that direction?
Yeah, Mike, it is. And I think I'll start by saying that not every CA should be an entrepreneur, but I think there are a lot of CAs who should be, and who don't decide to take that step. One of the best things about the CA, and Aki touched on that, it leaves you with a lot of options. And the interesting thing there is that if you don't have the skills to then make the correct next decision or adapt to the incorrect decision, you might find yourself a bit stuck. And sometimes having too many options can be overwhelming. I'd always rather be in that position. As long as you're well informed then how to take that next step with all those options and you don't end up trapped or the sense of being trapped when you're ready on. So one of the options for CAs is to become an entrepreneur. And I would love more CAs to become entrepreneurs. And that, you know, from my world of my group of CAs that I went through from university to the work world to starting a business to all the students I interact with, a lot talk about starting businesses, but not many do. And that's for lots of different reasons. And for me, it's not even about starting business, but the entrepreneurial mindset's an interesting one. And I think there's a lot of overlap between a CA's thinking and the entrepreneurial mindset. And there's a lot of skills that CAs develop that serve you as an entrepreneur really well. And that comes in what I call, when I think about learning, and let's go to auditing, which from the outside looking in, a lot of people see it as quite a boring topic. But learning's usually got a couple of layers. And the first layer might be a bit boring. Like if I learn the layer of, okay, how to identify risk in a business, and that's all I see it as, you might find that boring. But the second and third layer is where it gets interesting and where you start seeing that the skill that I've learned about in an audit context, wow, that's really interesting. To audit a business, I need to understand an industry. I need to understand that business. I need to understand the systems they have in place. And if you start understanding all those things, well, then you start understanding and identifying opportunities. And then once you've identified an opportunity and you understand the systems, you can implement a system to achieve a certain opportunity. And all of that comes from the mindset or the skills you developed in an auditing context or learning about auditing or financial reporting, tax, management, accounting, and finance. there are these layer one skills which everyone gets caught up on, and everyone's got to think about what second, third, secondary skills am I developing, and those are the really relevant ones that if you apply them properly in the real world, you could become an entrepreneur and start a business and have a huge advantage over another entrepreneur who didn't come from this sort of context and this sort of CA background, and they automatically might be slightly disadvantaged to you, who's got a much better understanding of how businesses operate. So that's the way I see it.
Because I think, you know, you guys as a panel, I think, have spoken to one of the big questions here, which is like, do CAs, are they still relevant in 5 years' time, right? And I think the answer kind of across all of you is yes, we need to continue to change in order to maintain that relevance, but there's nothing inherently about, you know, the profession or the industry that means it's not going to be relevant. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from you. But one of the things that's, you know, it comes through, there's a question from someone saying, would you recommend an additional qualification? You know, given the diversity that you're getting training as a CA, like, should you be studying something else as well? Or what's the answer here? Maybe Aki, I'm going to put you on the spot again, because I know that you are continuing your studies. Is that a requirement, you know, to be relevant?
I would say it is, but again, it really depends on the strength and the interest of the person. For me, getting another skill or studying something else exposes you to another form of thinking or another line of thinking that we might not have been exposed to in the accounting degree or in the postgraduate diploma in accounting. I mean, we don't do heavy research throughout the program. All we have to do is engage with exam papers and the teaching and learning material. But there's an element where you could exploit other opportunities like your research skills or your interaction with society and community instead of focusing mainly on just the books and the academics. So I would say it's not a requirement, but it'll put you a step ahead and give you a competitive advantage to your peers if you do have exposure in other markets and other qualifications as well.
So Hazel, you know, Aki's talking about kind of additional studies. Like, is that just because CAs are kind of A-type competitive personalities that want to be the best and find any kind of anything to give them that leg up? Or is it a kind of a signal of that kind of like learning, passion for learning that is often a feature of good CAs? Like, is it a requirement? What's your sense working with trainees?
So for me, it's, you know, like CA in itself, the qualification is a destination, and it's a major destination, which, you know, depending on where you want to go and what you want to do, could actually be I've arrived. And, you know, it's a major achievement. But you find that there is a lot of curiosity in people who pursue the CA qualification. And also it depends on where you will see yourself beyond the qualification. You know, if you think about an auditing environment, if you were to do your training contract in an audit environment, it's almost like a shopping basket for seeing what the world has to offer, because you go from client to client in different industries, seeing the different things that they do, and it gives you ideas about where you want to be once you qualify. So you find other people go on do an MBA, other people are interested in leadership, so that's why they do that. Other people see a place that they want to go, for example, with the entrepreneurial avenue, where they're like, okay, if I want to do this, I'm going to study this in addition to what I have. And, you know, that takes me in a direction, and they just don't stop because it's almost like it's a nature thing. But I would say that it's not a prerequisite. If somebody is, you know, like the other option is once you become a CA, depending on what you pursue, you could actually, you know, maybe pursue something further from a practical perspective. Go and embed yourself into something that can potentially be an expertise through, you know, the environment you're working in. If I take, for example, auditing as it is, maybe when you come out and you are a newly qualified CA, consider yourself to be like a GP, if you think about the medical practice, where you are a general practitioner, you're just a doctor, you can treat all sorts of illnesses and all of that. But beyond that, you find the CA saying, okay, now I want to go into real estate and construction. I want to be an expert in that, which is more like a doctor saying, you know what, I actually want a specialization and I want to now be whatever, orthopedic or anything that they choose, heart surgeon. And you go do that because that passion just keeps growing as you achieve more.
Yeah. So I think you're kind of like speaking to the sense I'm getting, which is that, learning is the fundamental thing. How you learn and what context you learn in isn't necessarily that important. You don't need to have a qualification, but what makes good CAs is that they're curious and continue to learn and evolve and pursue the directions that interest in them, that bring additional expertise. And I think that's kind of reassuring to hear. And I know, Ian, we've got 5 minutes left. So just a heads up.
I mean, it doesn't have to be, one of the things CAs are always doing is communicating. You can just improve your communication skills. Sometimes you have a good idea, you have something, but you can't communicate it properly. And as Hazel said earlier, is the degree she did and the degree I did and the current syllabus, if I look at the transcripts of that come across my desk, they're very similar. It hasn't changed much, but you got to add to that. So even if you did something, communication, you'd be doing yourself a great favor.
Yeah. I guess that, I think that's one of the things, Leon, maybe that you can touch on, because I think my experience of the CA Connect and Milpark programs is that there's a strong emphasis placed on the ability to reflect on where you are and then prioritize your development based on that reflection, on that assessment. Whether that's more broadly, like Ian's alluding to here, in terms of like, my communication skills perhaps aren't where I need them to be, or whether it's like narrowly in a particular subject or topic or skill set. But my sense is that when you talk about the need to change how people learn or how we engage people with the syllabus that Ian's referring to, it's really in kind of like embedding those skills of communication and reflection. That's where the opportunities lie.
Yeah, 100%, Mike. And I think a few things there. The CAs definitely don't see it as the end. And one of the things in remaining relevant in a fast changing world is expect the need to constantly have to learn. And whatever you're learning, it's going to be different for everyone based maybe on interests or a specific need. And if you have that skill, you are going to remain very relevant and valuable in the business world and even in your personal life. And part of my job as one of the stakeholders in developing CAs is teaching students learning to learn. I mean, that's a huge skill. And learning to learn, there's a number of sub skills that go into that: self-awareness, self-reflection, curiosity, etc. Those are all fundamental things that we've touched on. And so, yes, some people, I expect everyone to continue to learn. Everyone might continue to learn slightly differently. One of the challenges, I think, in the profession, numbers talks to people coming into the profession. We also got to challenge people in the profession, like who is keeping themselves up to date, figuring out what else they need to learn to remain relevant. And that's important for everyone. And so that need to constantly learn new things is important. And like Ian says, it doesn't mean everyone must go into a CFA. And, maybe you want to because you're specifically interested in it or your job requires it. You might just need to go into a Toastmasters course and you get better at public speaking and improve your communication. And all of that is valuable learning. And so, and if you don't have the answer to what should I do next, you have the ability to realize that I need to ask someone for help and get advice from various people. And that might inform your next step, or whether to wait a bit longer to get more information as to what your next step is. That's also fine.
Yeah, thanks, Leon. I think, it's difficult to kind of bring this conversation to a close. I think there's really a lot to kind of like dive into here. I think a lot of opportunities in how we approach the industry going forward and how we train people. Ian, I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds to maybe kind of say what for you is the goal for this numbers program? What do you want to see on the other side?
I think it's just to enrich the gene pool of CAs, is to bring people from diverse backgrounds, diverse studies, diverse interests, and that just have the passion. You know, they may not have thought about it before, and I think it's just to ignite that spark. That's it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ian. And thanks to all the panelists, Hazel, Vyako, Leon, and Ian. It's been like really fascinating listening to you guys kind of talk about something that's obviously very close to your hearts. Guys, to those of you who have patiently kind of listened and been attentive to what's been discussed, I know there are lots of questions about the numbers program, how to qualify for it, what the details are, what the timelines are, you know, all of those kinds of things. And really the best place to look is going to theknowledgetrust.org. So please, if you're interested in this, go check that out, follow the steps, go through the application process. My hope is that you've gotten a good sense of like why this has come about and what kind of solutions the numbers program provides to the industry and to you. But yeah, thanks for your time and attention, and thanks to all the panelists this afternoon.